On July 28, 2023, a Friday afternoon, 30,000 Americans went to work. Truck drivers, dock workers, dispatchers, mechanics, people who had spent their entire careers at the same company. Some of them 20, 30 years on the job. They clocked in, they loaded freight, they drove routes they had driven 1,000 times. And then, before the weekend was over, they got a text message. 3 words. Operations have ceased. No warning, no severance, no goodbye. Just a text message. And a company that had existed for 99 years vanished overnight. You've seen yellow trucks your entire life. Those bright yellow trailers on every highway, every dock load, every distribution center in America. Yellow wasn't just a trucking company. It was one of the last great pillars of unionized American freight. Built in 2019-24, survived the Great Depression, survived World War II, survived deregulation, survived recession after recession. 99 years. But here's what they never told you about how it really ended. 3 years before it collapsed, the federal government handed Yellow $700 million in taxpayer money, the largest single loan under the entire CARES Act National Security Program. And Yellow still went bankrupt. But that's not the detail that will keep you up at night. The detail is what happened in the weeks before 30,000 people lost their jobs. 1. How a company that survived 99 years of American history destroyed itself in 15. 2. The $700 million government bailout that saved no one, and who really got that money. 3. The decision made in the final weeks before collapse that tells you everything about how corporate America really works. Stay until the end, because the most outrageous moment in this story isn't the bankruptcy, it's what happened 4 weeks before it. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 1924. A.J. Harrell and his son start a small transportation company called Yellow Cab Transit. 1 truck, 1 Model T Ford. They called it yellow because of the color of their vehicles. Simple, honest, the kind of beginning that could become anything. By the 1930s, yellow freight had survived the Great Depression, outlasting hundreds of competitors who couldn't handle the crash. By the 1940s, yellow was moving military supplies across America during World War II. By the 1950s, those bright yellow trailers were an iconic sight on the brand new interstate highway system. By the 1970s, Yellow was one of the 3 most powerful trucking companies in the United States, the big 3 of LTL freight: Yellow, Roadway, Consolidated Freight. Yellow's drivers were Teamsters, middle-class wages, pensions, benefits, the kind of job that let a man raise a family. 40,000 employees at its peak. This was not just a company. This was a piece of the American dream. And then, in 1980, a single law changed everything. The Motor Carrier Act of 1980, trucking deregulation. Overnight, the federal government opened the trucking industry to full competition. Non-union carriers flooded the market. The big 3 started bleeding. Consolidated Freight, gone in 2002. Yellow and Roadway, they survived, but only by merging. In 2003, Yellow Corporation acquired Roadway Express for $966 million. But Yellow didn't integrate the companies. Not really. They kept 2 of everything when 1 would do. And they borrowed heavily to pay for the acquisition. The debt started accumulating. Then, in 2007, Yellow makes another major acquisition, U.S. Freightways. More debt, more complexity. By 2008, the financial crisis hits. Freight volume collapses, revenue falls off a cliff. And Yellow, carrying more debt than it can service, is suddenly fighting for its life.
The workers bailed them out. Between 2009 and 2019, the Teamsters gave back $5 billion in wage and pension concessions to keep Yellow alive. Drivers who should have been earning more took less for 10 years to save a company they believed in. And Yellow's management, instead of fixing the structural problems, used it to survive another quarter. The debt never went down, the duplicate operations never merged. By 2019, Yellow was $1.6 billion in debt, $5 billion in worker concessions later, worse than before. And then COVID hit. April 2020. The pandemic is shutting down the American economy. Yellow's management applies for a federal bailout loan through the CARES Act. Yellow's application made one central claim, that it handled 68% of all LTL freight for the U.S. Department of Defense. The Defense Department's own analysts reviewed that claim and they said, no. In June 2020, the Defense Department formally notified the Treasury that Yellow did not qualify. The actual number was 20 to 40%, not 68. The application should have been denied. But then something happened. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows called Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. Congressional investigators later confirmed that President Trump himself expressed personal interest in the loan's approval. On July 7, 2020, 3 weeks after the Defense Department said no, Treasury approved the loan anyway. $700 million. The single largest loan under the single national security provision of the CARES Act. The second largest loan under that program was around $20 million. Yellow got $700 million. Come. The government also received 29% of Yellow's stock in exchange. And what did Yellow do with $700 million of taxpayer money? In the 3 years between getting that loan and filing for bankruptcy, Yellow's debt barely moved. The structural problems were never fixed. The duplicate operations were never merged. A restructuring plan called One Yellow, announced in 2022, 3 years after the loan. The Teamsters blocked parts of its implementation. Yellow accused the union of sabotage. The union accused management of using the restructuring as cover for cutting jobs and wages. Both were partly right, both were partly wrong. And while they fought, the company bled. By summer 2023, Yellow had burned through its cash reserves. It couldn't make payroll. It couldn't pay health insurance premiums for its employees. On July 30th, 2023, Yellow sent that text message on operations have ceased. 30,000 people gone. Now here is the moment that tells you everything, the detail that will stay with you. 4 weeks before Yellow sent that text message to 30,000 workers, 4 weeks before 30,000 Americans lost their jobs, their health insurance, their pension contributions, Yellow's board of directors approved $4.6 million in executive retention bonuses. $4.6 million paid to the executives who were steering the company into bankruptcy, not to the workers who had given back $5 billion over 10 years. Not to the drivers who would get a text message and nothing else, to the executives. Congress in 2005 restricted companies from paying executive retention bonuses after filing for bankruptcy, so Yellow paid the bonuses before filing, 4 weeks before. Perfectly legal, perfectly timed. The CEO who presided over the final collapse walked away, the CFO walked away, and 30,000 workers got a text message. 3 words: operations have ceased. The terminal's 128 freight facilities were sold at auction for nearly $2 billion. The government loan of $700 million repaid, with $151 million in interest. So the taxpayers got their money back. The workers, the 30,000 people who lost their jobs, got the Warren Act minimum, argued over in bankruptcy court. The pension funds, the retirement savings of 22,000 Teamsters are still being litigated. Central States Pension Fund filed a claim for $5.8 billion. The workers gave $5 billion to save the company. The company's remains paid the government first. The workers are still waiting. Yellow Corporation was founded in 1924. It survived a century of American history. It was not killed by a pandemic. It was not killed by a union. It was killed by 15 years of bad decisions, accumulated debt, and management that kept choosing the next quarter over the next decade. And in its final weeks, it chose its executives over its workers one last time. That is the real story of Yellow Corporation, not the bankruptcy, the 4 weeks before it. Subscribe, because next week we go inside the empire that did all of the opposite of everything Yellow did, and build something that will outlast all of us.